This is the World Today Weekend on CKNW News Talk 980. Once again, here's Sean Leslie.
All right, welcome back to the show. If you follow the show for the last number of years, you'll know that I have followed with interest the case of Marc Emery, who is serving time in prison in the United States because he was a Wall Street financier who nearly caused the collapse of the world economy. Oh, wait a minute. No, none of those guys went to jail. Not one of those guys went to jail. No, Marc Emery is in prison because he sold some pot seeds in the United States. He mailed some marijuana seeds to Americans. So he's in prison for years. And now, apparently, he's in solitary confinement in prison. What the heck is going on? Marc's wife is Jodie Emery, political activist, public speaker, owner of Cannabis Culture Headquarters and Cannabis Culture Magazine and Pot TV, and she joins me now. Hi, Jodie. How you doing?
I'm doing my best as possible.
What the heck is going on? Why is Marc in solitary?
Well, on Monday, I got word through 3 different inmates that Marc had been put in solitary confinement. And I changed my visitation to go see him because solitary inmates only get between 1 and 3 on Fridays to have visits. So I flew down Thursday and saw him, and he was in tattered clothing, giant shorts held up with a string tied around his waist, holes in his socks that were so bad they don't even have toes or heels. And he said he was told that he was being put in solitary because he's being investigated for photos of his prison band that were posted online because they think they were taken with a cell phone, which isn't allowed in prisons. But the outrageous thing, and Marc's jaw dropped, and he looked at this officer and said, "But you authorized those photos to be taken with the prison camera. You developed them. You guys approved those. The music director, the recreation director, the Special Investigative Services director, and the warden, they all knew that these photos were approved in February. They were sent to me and posted online in April. And now, months later, while Marc's prison transfer application is in the U.S. government's hands, he's suddenly put in solitary confinement for a week now, almost, for an absurd reason. The prison approved those photos. They took them themselves. I'm holding them in my hand, the printed paper that came to me in a mailed envelope, and they're claiming Marc had a cell phone even though they haven't found one, and they know it's nonsense. And on the first night, there was a fire in the solitary confinement cells. There was smoke filling. The air was hot and unbreathable. Marc is confined to a bathroom-sized cell with a stranger.
Good Lord.
Be in there for 23 hours a day with no fresh air, no sunlight, no exercise, no phone calls. I can't speak to him or see him until I fly down in a month from now and get maybe another hour and a half with him because it took an hour to process the visit, and I only got an hour and a half to see him. And this is a nightmare, and they won't tell us why he's being held there. They know that they took the photos and approved them, so this is mind-boggling to me. And we know that hundreds of thousands of people have been put in solitary confinement. They get driven insane. They die in there. Marc has already been given a possibly fatal disease, MRSA, by being in the U.S. prison system after being stolen, admittedly, for financing legalization. That's the reason he's there. That's what the DEA said. And now he's being held in what the United Nations calls torture, the United States
Correct.
prison.
Correct. You're telling me he didn't sharpen his toothbrush into a shiv and stab somebody else or attack a prison guard. There was a photo of his prison band taken, and they don't like it, and they're accusing him of somehow having a secret phone that he's not supposed to have in there.
Even though the very people who are investigating him are the ones who approved through paperwork to have those photos taken.
What the hell?
It's outrageous. It's insane. And remember, this is a man who's never hurt anyone. Marc is an exemplary prisoner. He's always on good behavior. Everybody respects him. He respects everyone else. He follows the rules. He may be a rabble-rouser and a critic of government when he's out, but when he's behind bars like he is now for over 3 years in the United States, medium security prison, he is always a great model prisoner, and the prison knows it. And they all look at me with these very sad eyes, and they know that this is unjust. They know it's unjust that he's even there, but they know that what's happening right now is even worse, but none of them can do anything. And if the warden himself, who visited Marc in his solitary cell, Marc looked at the warden and said, "You know this was approved. How come this is going on?" And the warden just wouldn't answer, so we know it's someone higher up. And it just goes to prove that Marc is a political prisoner being persecuted, not for ever hurting another living being, never going to the United States, giving away every dollar like the DEA admits to legalization efforts, and that's why he's there. And right now, his transfer application is in the Department of Justice's hands, and I'm begging anyone who wants to help to please write to the U.S. and write to Canada to approve his transfer request home. You can go to freemarc.ca, and that's Marc with a C, and it has the addresses, and I ask people to please politely contact these departments and Vic Taves, the Public Safety Minister of Canada, and ask them to please bring him to the Canadian prison system so I at least know he's okay and I can hear from him and see him.
Well, I totally agree. He's a political prisoner. I've said that on this show before. He's absolutely a political prisoner. And this comes at a time when U.S. states are voting in favor of legalizing marijuana, and yet there's still this guy serving time in a federal prison for the crime of selling seeds across the border. Now he's in solitary. And Jodie, how much time has he got left in his official sentence here?
Well, his good behavior release date, which is 85% of a sentence if you're on good behavior, would be July 9th, 2014. And Marc was on record to meet that. If he got approved for transfer, he would come home sooner, and that would be great. But what I'm very concerned about right now is that to be charged in prison with having a cell phone is one of the most highest offenses you can get. And if they investigate him right now, the U.S. government might say that they can't approve his transfer because he's being investigated for one of the worst offenses you can do as a prisoner, which we all know is bogus. Again, it's completely bogus. And if they disapprove his transfer, he might lose his good time and be in there until 2015, which I never even wanted to imagine the full 5-year sentence. But maybe that's what they'll do to him. Somebody's got it out for him because this is absurd and everybody knows it.
And are they telling you how long he might be in solitary? Does he know? Like what? What?
They don't tell you. They could be there for a day. There are people in solitary confinement for 10 and 20 years.
Unbelievable.
In the United States right now. It could be weeks that he's there or months. I mean, Marc already spent 3 weeks in solitary confinement in Seattle back in 2010 for breaking an unwritten rule about not having a phone call broadcast to supporters. And after 3 weeks, he was let out. But people start to have very serious health effects. The United Nations documents all this, that solitary confinement drives people insane, and after 15 days, you start to have negative effects. There's people in there who kill themselves because they're driven insane. Imagine someone you love most being locked into the room, the size of a bathroom with a stranger for 23 hours a day and dragged out in handcuffs to a cage to get fresh air 1 hour a day, having to shower and use the washroom and be stuck in that space all the time, no fresh air, no sunlight. Imagine your loved one being there, even if they ever hurt anybody, but Marc never did. But when you imagine that that's happening to someone you love, you realize that the drug war and the imprisonment industry doesn't just hurt those who are suffering the imprisonment. It hurts people like me. It hurts the wives and the mothers and the fathers and the children and the communities and the loved ones of people. And the government should never hurt anybody. The government should never harm anyone. They claim to punish people for hurting others. That's why they go after these so-called bad guys. But when they inflict the pain and suffering and torture themselves, they are not the good guys.
Jodie,
so we need to put an end to that.
Jodie, stand by. I must take a break, but I do want to come back to this. And you said something very important, the prison industry, and that's what it is. In the United States, particularly where it is privatized, the prison industry has immense political influence. These are the guys who are fighting marijuana legalization efforts, because if you suddenly make pot legal, then there's going to be a lot fewer customers. They're going to make less money from imprisoning people for the government. It is unbelievable. I do welcome your calls, comments, questions at 280-9898, star 9898 on your cell phone, and we'll be back on CKNW News Talk 980.
This is the World Today Weekend on CKNW News Talk 980. Once again, here's Sean Leslie.
All right, I'm speaking with Jodie Emery, political activist, owner of Cannabis Culture Headquarters, Cannabis Culture Magazine, Pot TV. Her husband, Marc Emery, also a pot activist and political activist, is now in solitary confinement in prison in the United States, where he's serving out his term for selling marijuana seeds to customers in the United States. I don't know how they figured out he was doing that, given that it was entirely public for a long time. It's just unbelievable. And Jodie telling us that his alleged crime here is being photographed with his band in prison, and Jodie saying that they had permission from the prison staff to take those photos. They appear on the internet, and suddenly he's accused of possibly having a phone in prison, which is a very serious offense, and now he's in solitary, could affect his sentence. Maybe he doesn't get out for early release. Just unbelievable. And Jodie, just before we get to some calls, you talked about the prison industry, and I referenced this before we took the break, but is it not true that the prison industry, the private prison industry in the United States, has become an incredibly potent political force?
Oh, absolutely. The private prison industry is one of the fastest growing industries in the United States overall. They have stock trades that people invest in this, and they send letters to their shareholders and stockholders saying that they promise to guarantee prisons will be operating at top maximum capacity to make sure that the money keeps coming in. And they do admit that they lobby against changes to immigration and marijuana laws specifically, because if they change those laws, they will have fewer people to lock up.
Unreal.
This is disgusting. And we also know that the private prison industry sells out the inmates who have to work. They sell them out to corporations who pay them pennies per hour on slave wages. This is enforced slavery. And did you know that there's even an exemption in the United States Constitution? You're not allowed to have slaves. Slavery is prohibited, except if you're in a federal prison. If you've been convicted of a crime, you are then allowed to be used as a slave. And this is not a conspiracy.
It's like China.
It's insane. It's insane. And Marc is also forced to work. They're all forced to work. And they work creating goods for all sorts of industries, but especially the military as well. So there's a lot of money here, and they do want to keep their prison numbers up. Now, Marc was originally sent to a for-profit private prison in Georgia, and he used an old typewriter they had there to type up blogs and mail them out, describing how inmates were being deprived of any sort of health, any sort of safety. Nobody has rights because they're not Americans in that facility. And he documented it. And finally, when he was applying for transfer in 2011, the U.S. government refused his transfer and said it was because of him bringing attention to the private prison. They put him on a bus all by himself, the GEO Group, which is an enormous industry. They put him on a bus by himself and shipped him off to Mississippi into the normal Bureau of Prisons industry. And we believe that was because they didn't want him shining a light into the darkest places of the U.S. prison system.
It's like they're creating this argument that imprisoning people is a justification in and of itself. It's a positive economic activity or something, when I think it's something we should be trying to get away from. But let's take some calls here. Ben in Vancouver is on the phone lines. Hi, Ben.
Yeah, hi. I'm just, well, in the first place, he shouldn't have done what he did. Then he wouldn't have been convicted. Now just let him serve out his sentence and quit crying.
Are you serious? For selling some seeds to willing buyers in the United States, you think that's worth, what, 5 years in prison and solitary confinement, Ben? I guess Ben lacks the courage of his convictions, I would say, Jodie.
Well, and certainly there are people who say if you break the law, you should go to jail. But when people were freeing slaves through the Underground Railway, they were breaking the law. When people stood up on the bus like Rosa Parks and refused to give up her seat, she was breaking the law. When Gandhi marched to the sea, he was breaking the law. When people hid Jews in the Nazi Germany, they were breaking the law. But you shouldn't say those people should go to jail. The only people who should ever be punished by the law are those who harm other human beings.
Yes,
and
I agree.
Marc has never harmed another human being, and in fact, the law is punishing and harming human beings. The government itself is causing the harm and suffering. And you can tell any wife or child of a prisoner that they deserve the suffering they're going through when their loved one never hurt anyone else either. That person is a very hurtful person. They obviously don't have much compassion.
Why don't any of the Wall Street bankers who almost caused the world economy to collapse go to jail? Not one. Not one has gone to jail. Let's go to Jack and Poco on the open lines. Hi, Jack.
Hi there. You accused the guy before me of not having any courage of this conviction to stay on the line. He probably just figured the line was over. He didn't. Usually guys cut him off that quick. But I agree with him. If you know the rules, the rule is there. You break the rule, be prepared to pay the penalty. I don't care. You can't compare freeing slaves to selling seeds when you know it's against the rules to sell the seeds.
You know it's not going to be against the law for very much longer, Jack.
Well, yeah, but it's not until then. You guys don't want to play politics. You're talking politics, aren't you?
Well, let me remind you that Marc Emery never left Canada. He did not go to the United States. He was selling seeds in Canada for over a decade, and he paid income tax, and he was in the news and the media, and every politician knew. The Canadian police in Vancouver investigated him in 2003, and the Crown in British Columbia said, no, we are not going to charge Marc Emery for selling seeds because it's a $200 fine for that offense and because it's an outrageous charge. And what happened? The United States chose to have him facing 30 years to life in prison in a foreign country he never, ever went to. How is that just or fair? You tell me. Should you go get beheaded for having a woman not covered up in a different country?
Exactly.
You're here? No, Marc was shipped off to a foreign country he never went to, and that is the injustice. If he broke the law in Canada, he should have faced the courts here. But our country and the Harper government and even the Liberal government sold him out by having him sent off to the United States. That is the injustice.
Jack, you still on the line?
Hey, it's the United States rules that he broke. Of course he should go there. What do you guys... look, the guy knew it was against the law to sell it in the States, so what did he do? He sold it in the States. You get caught, you could pay the penalty.
But did you know that peaceful civil disobedience did things like legalize Sunday shopping in Ontario, which Marc is responsible for? Peaceful civil disobedience resulted in allowing literature about marijuana, and even rap music was illegal in Canada. And Marc, by using peaceful civil disobedience to demonstrate the law is unjust, challenged those laws. He should not have been sent to a foreign country when the offense had to be an offense here in order to be extradited. Why wasn't he charged here? Why was he sent to a foreign country? Should you be sent to prison in the Middle East for preaching Christianity here in Canada? No. So why would Marc be sent off to a foreign country for an offense that merits a $200 fine in Canada?
I agree. Jodie, I have to jump in. I'm out of time. Thank you so much as always. Jack, I have to cut you off as well. But listen, folks, if you couldn't get through, if you want to comment on this, please send me an email. I'm going to read some emails out towards the end of the program. It's sleslie@cknw.com.